Right, this video might be one of the harsher criticisms I've made of Wizards of the Coast and the management of Magic in a while, so I'm going to start out with some positive praise just to point out the fact that, well, I do think they do a good job the majority of the time. In spite of power creep and a much needed push for bans and a culture of banning, I do think that Throne and Theros, M20, War of the Spark, even Modern Horizons on the whole were really good sets. There was some great design, some great flavour, some really fun environments to play in, even if there were some whiffs in some of the cards. What I'm trying to say is that myself and other content creators will often focus in, because it's much easier to focus in, on the negatives, when in reality, for the most part, the design teams at Wizards of the Coast get it right, 99% of the time. They just get overshadowed by the Hogaks, the Eldrazi, the Okos, and other things, especially with the mimetic nature of the way that we all bitch about it. In short, it's really easy to circle jerk on the negative points. That said, I'm about to get quite negative, I guess, about Fetchlands. I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi. That was my dog. No. I'm Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. I'm the Magic the Gathering content creating equivalent of cracking a Fetchland and realizing you have no more fetchable lands in your deck. You just sit there, fanning through, and your opponents at the table are like, "You okay?" And you're like, "Oh, fuck!" In this video, I'm going to talk about Fetchlands. And specifically, I'm going to talk about their history, their role within Magic the Gathering, their functionality within the game, and then their relationship with Wizards of the Coast and the community, and why they haven't been reprinted very much. Originally, and this seems to have been faded into the annals of history, we had Fetchlands in Mirage. Lands like Floodplain that entered tapped and upon untapping could be sacrificed to go and find an island or a plains and put it into play. Importantly, these don't have to be basic lands. They could, at the time, grab original dual lands like Underground Sea, for example, meaning that your Floodplains wasn't just giving you blue and white mana. It was also giving you the ability to grab slightly off-colour lands, in this case Underground Sea for black mana, so you have an access to a wide range of colours off of one land. These Mirage Fetchlands have fell out of favour and aren't really discussed much, but if you're on a budget and you're building for Commander, I can't recommend them enough. They give you abilities to put things into the graveyard that can be recurred off of, I don't know, Crucible of Worlds and Sun Titans. They can fetch off-colour jewels like original jewels, Shocklands, and the Tango lands from Battle for Zendikar. They're generally pretty good, especially if you can't afford the original jewels, which, let's be honest, no one blames you, they're way too fucking expensive. I generally think people are sleeping on the Mirage Fetchlands, so perhaps pick some up for your Commander deck if you're looking for budget alternatives to Fetchlands. Now, as far as I can tell, I wasn't playing then, so I've had to research into it. I don't think these Mirage Fetchlands were seeing any sort of competitive play at their time of printing. I looked back and did some googling for decks between 1996 and 1998, and I didn't really see any of them coming up at all in the mana bases, mainly because I'm not sure if fetchable jewels were still in Type 1 with them. They probably were, but I'm not sure. Also, that there weren't any cards that abused them or relied upon them. There was no graveyard shenanigans that needed lands in the bin, there was no Life from the Loam, there was no Lotus Cobra, there was nothing that really cared about Fetchlands either, so I just didn't see any play. Then, in 2002, we got pretty much strict upgrades to that Fetchland cycle. Again, only in allied colour pairs. Instead of entering the battlefield tapped, we could now pay the low cost of 1 life to have an untapped land at our disposal, and as any good Magic player knows, life is a resource, and 1 life for a whole turn of added tempo is an absolute bargain. These became instant staples and have been ever since in every single format where they are legal. They are mainstays of those formats. We didn't see the Fetchland cycle completed until 7 years later in original Zendikar. 2009, these were an incredible design too, because not only did Zendikar have a discovery and adventure theme in which exploration of the unknown was a core thematic concern, but it also had landfall as a mechanic, so having Fetchlands that could give you 2 triggers to say your Step Links or GOP'd or of course Lotus Cobra was great synergy and just cool design. On top of that, Zendikar was a highly unstable and mana-rich plane, so having the earth literally crack open to reveal new terrain beneath is a wonderfully evocative piece of game mechanics. And also on top of that, having these mana-rich and vibrant lands end up being the most expensive lands in the game is perhaps not an intended piece of meta flavour or commentary, but it's still pretty on brand and on point. Once these cards have been and gone out of standard, they start to hike in price because they are staples in Legacy and Extended and other formats that use them. And then in August of 2011, Modern was introduced as a way of replacing, because Extended had gone by that point, replacing Extended as a format that's not quite as old as Legacy or Vintage, but gives you an ability to play with your older cards in archetypes that may not be in Standard now or be viable in Legacy. So the demand for Fetchlands started to go up, and as you would expect, with expensive, desirable cards that Wizards of the Coast know are sought after because they're staples in competitive play, you'd expect reprints, wouldn't you? Well, 3 more years after the inception of Modern and 5 years after Zendikar, we got reprints of original Fetchlands into Standard via Khans of Tarkir in 2014. Now, importantly, what this did was put the original Fetchlands into Modern, and for the most part this was a good thing, because if you think about it, if the 5 Fetchlands from Zendikar were doing all the heavy lifting of Fetchlands in Modern, you'd play off-colour fetches in your deck because that's all you had. Then having the other colour ones would enable archetypes, make mana bases better for the decks that are in enemy colour pairs, and just basically alleviate the issue of Scalding Tarn being the only good blue fetch. Instead of having to rely on just Scalding Tarn and Misty Rainforest, you now had access to Polluted Delta and Flooded Strand as well. Initially, for the most part, when they were printed into Khans of Tarkir, that was to absolute rapturous praise. They helped to fuel the graveyard mechanic called Delve, which ended up being broken as shit, but also allowed people to have an easier jumping point into Eternal formats. There was a fear that if Fetchlands ever came back, they might come back as this dreaded mythic slot that now existed, but they came back as rare as well, which was a good thing across the board. Now keep in mind during this history lesson that I'm going to come back to some of the issues around Fetchlands, because let's be real, the rapturous applause initially and then the sort of nostalgic look back at Khans doesn't take into account some of the issues people had with Fetchlands whilst they were in Standard. Once Fetchlands were traded out of Standard, their prices dropped minimally, and they still remain desirable because of Modern and Legacy, and to a lesser extent Commander. Whilst they were in Standard, the Fetchlands were relatively cheap, and we even saw Windswept Heath get reprinted in what was called a Clash Pack, which was like the event deck of the time. Many, myself included, were excited to see this and thought this might be them increasing the EV of this kind of product in future and getting Fetchlands and Shocklands and any of the desirable lands into more circulation, and maybe they'll do this more in future, and of course they fucking didn't. But don't worry, during this time we had the inception of a supplemental product line called Modern Masters, designed to print highly desirable cards that are needed for Modern into players' hands. Were the Fetchlands in the first set of that? Were they fuck? But what about the second one, Vince? I hear some of you ask. No. You'd think with 10 of the fucking things, 2 cycles, the original Onslaught ones and later the Khans ones were printed there, and then the Zendikar ones, you'd think they could put 5 in one and 5 in the other, but they didn't. Now these sets were still really high DV, they're still a success, they're still very good limited environments too. I mean, the first one was my favourite draft environment of all time, but for some reason they didn't put fetches in them. 2017 rolls round, 3 years after Khans, and we finally saw Fetchlands printed into a booster product with the 3rd and final Modern Masters set. This was great. This was met, once again, with rapturous applause. People were hyped to crack packs. They were hyped to draft, to get to big events, play sealed, scalp the boxes from the local game stores and sell them at a markup on eBay to fund their medical bills. But that, my friends, marks the end of the reprint history of Fetchlands. We have seen a few here and there. There was an WMCQ Flooded Strand a couple of years ago. There were some Judge promos, but the cards still remained popular and sought after, but just not reprinted. The demand was there, but the supply was still relatively low. And that's a nice segue into why they're so fucking expensive. At time of writing, Scalding Tarn is $70. It was $100 with the advent of Pioneer and the seeming like dropping of Legacy by Wizards of the Coast. The price of Fetchlands actually come down a little bit because I guess the demand isn't so much there, and some people might be fed up with this shit and selling their collections. Even Bloodstained Mire, which is perhaps one of the least played of the Fetchlands, is $20. But why do they demand such a high price tag? Well, it's kind of obvious. They're just huge staples, as I've explained. They're the backbone, they're the cornerstone of all the formats they're legal in. Vintage, Legacy, Modern, Commander, Canlander, even like the advent of new stuff like Oathbreaker. They are just really, really solid cards that allow you to get access to mana, the colours you need, and play your spells. In the formats that aren't singleton, like EDH, you often need 4 or 2 play sets of them to make your mana base really pop. I regret clicking my fingers and saying pop like that. I really wish I hadn't done that. And I have complete creative control to edit that out. I'm probably not going to. The supply is lacking, but the demand is definitely there. We don't know how many rares or how many numbers of a certain rare show up in a set, because Wizards of the Coast don't tell us, but we only know, as from the history lesson, when these things got reprinted. And to clarify, since Onslaught in 2002, 18 years ago, we have seen the original 5 printed twice in booster products. Once in 2002 and then again in Khans. That's a frequency of once every 9 years. Since Zendikar in 2009, we've seen these reprinted into booster products twice. 11 years means that makes an average of 5.5 years between the reprinting of these 5 bloody Magic cards. When you lay it out like that, it doesn't sound good. But why? That's the question, right? Why do they get reprinted so infrequently? Why was Tarmogoyf for Chase Rare in 3 different Modern Master sets and Fetchlands weren't? I'm now going to come to talking about the bad, the good, and then the ugly. The bad is the dark side of Fetchlands, the problems that they have, the criticisms that they have, often levelled at them by Wizards of the Coast themselves, that I believe the community has a bit of Stockholm Syndrome for, and just believes what they say without thinking, hang on a minute, that sounds like shite. They make mana too good. Fetchlands and fetchable jewels mean that you can just fetch up whatever colour you need and you can cast your spells. And we kind of saw that in the peak of Khans Standard when it joined Battle for Zendikar. Battle for Zendikar had Tango lands being lands with fetchable types on them again. And what that means is you start to see things like a Tarka Red and Jeskai Black, or Dark Jeskai, or Moist Jund, and other terrifying deck names like that. Even when you look at the top 8 of Pro Tour Battle for Zendikar to try and see if really this is a narrative that actually stood up at the highest levels of Magic, you do see decks that weren't playing more than 2 colours. But then you see 3-colour decks like the winning deck, Abzan Midrange, that was playing 1 red-black fetchable lands so that the Wooded Foothills could still fetch a black source, meaning the mana bases were getting kind of ridiculous. My counterpoint to all that is kind of to say, so? In a format like Standard that rotates so often, why can't we have periods where 2-colour or 3-colour or even 4 and 5-colour decks are pushed? Surely after a block like Khans of Tarkir, designed to give people access to 3-colour combinations, wedges as they call them, like Abzan and Jeskai, surely seeing those things rise to the top actually says, you know what, we did a good job. I'm a big believer in letting players cast their spells, and the whole idea that multicoloured spells are like a downside, like Siege Rhino was meant to be hard to cast, well, the argument is the mana base was so good that he was never hard to cast, but let's be real, that's kind of like what it's like all the time. The mana is a lot worse in Standard than it was then, but you'll still see 3-colour decks like Jund Sacrifice come up. Their mana bases aren't as good, sure, and sometimes they can fold to their own mana bases, but why can't we have periods where the mana is good and then periods where the mana is bad? Why is that inherently a problem? The other issue is that they say this, that Fetchlands were the problem, but they weren't. They died for the sins of fetchable jewels. Jewel lands that had 2 types of land on them. That was the issue, not the fetches themselves. I think Wizards of the Coast knew that they were going to do this. They put Tanglelands into BFZ, to Battle for Zendikar, for the purpose, the express purpose of having them play with Fetchlands. And then when that was a mistake, or a mistake by their own design philosophy or rules, they were like, oh, it wasn't us putting these 2 together that's the problem. It must inherently be this object that's been powerful and great in Magic since forever. And then they asked me a gun, and they just gunned them. Gunned them? Shot them. Bacow. Take that, Fetchlands, you shit. The next criticism of Fetchlands is shuffling. Now, if I was to sit here and say that out of the first 3, 4, or 5 turns of a game, you were shuffling 3 or 4 times, that wouldn't increase the time which a game takes, I would be lying to you. That would be disingenuous. So I cannot sit here and refute the idea that Fetchlands increase the length in which you have to spend playing a game of Magic, shuffling up, talking to your opponent, or in competitive circles, quietly looking down at your deck. Or not at your deck, because it might mean that you're cheating because you see cards, like looking away, just not talking. The point I'm going to make as a counterpoint to this, I'm basically conceding, yes, that is true for Standard, but there's 2 weird caveats to this. The first is that Fabled Passage exists, and they also put Prismatic Vista into Modern Horizons recently, so they put it into older sets and into current Standard we have Fabled Passage. They're obviously not really fast with people shuffling. Just not shuffling as much as they do when they play 8 to 12 Fetchlands. It does lead to the question, could they just print like only in green the Fetchlands because it's green's colour identity? But that's probably bad because green's too pushed. But the shuffling aspect there can't be too much of an issue if it's minimised by not having mana bases full of Fetchlands. So we can have replacements to Fetchlands coming like Fabled Passage. Great. The other counterpoint I have, well I actually have 3, well 2 more coming up. The other counterpoint I have is, that already happens in Legacy and Modern. People know it's happening. People kind of expect it. It's a Pandora's box that's been opened, and those formats live in that box. It's like a little box full of doll's house furniture, and they're making tea, and I don't know where the fuck this analogy is going. But it's already open, and they're already doing it, so why the fuck are the lands reprinted so little that they cost so fucking much? Why does little Johnny down the shop think he can never play Modern because it's going to cost him upwards of $280 to buy 4 Golden Tans? Why is that happening? Simply because you think Standard doesn't need shuffling. Those two things do not fucking those two things do not merge. They are not the same issue. That's bollocks. And lastly, if you're pushing Arena, a digital client, a way to play Magic without a table or another human being in front of you, who gives a shit how long you spend shuffling? Because Arena will do it for you. So the shuffling thing, it's for the most part just bollocks. And then lastly, we come to the real tip of the pile of bullshit, which is, and this isn't something Wizards say, but this is something people say, they're too expensive. Are you having a fucking laugh? Of course they're too expensive, but that's not the Fetchlands' inherent issue. That piece of cardboard only has value because there isn't enough of them in the fucking world and people want to play with them. Do you know how you fix that problem? I know I paused there because I want you to answer the question yourself. And you're going to say it, right? Reprint the fucking things. Jesus Christ on a bike. And the thing is, let's just say hypothetically that they can't be printed into Standard. Because, let's just say, devil's advocate, hypothetically, the first 2 points were true. Too much shuffling and the mana bases are too good. So why were they not in Modern Masters 1? Modern Masters 2? Eternal Masters, Iconic Masters, Ultimate Masters, Battle Bond, Conspiracy 1, Conspiracy 2. I've probably missed out. Oh, Mystery Booster. I've probably missed out more. Tell me in the comments, did I miss out a draft product there? All the precons, Commander products. Why have they been missed out of so many things? Because they can't be in Standard product. Surely that would push them into these products. And it's not reprint equity. That's another thing that I haven't got time to go on to. I'm trying to make this video. I was going to make it sub 10 minutes, but now we're up to 20 fucking odd. Fuck! So why is the question? Why? Why won't they reprint them? That is the key question. Fixing your mana allows you to cast spells. It allows you to play multicolored, legendary, powerful planeswalkers and mythics that they keep printing. Why not let people have good mana bases in the formats where those mana bases are already good? We're just making them more accessible. Let little Jimmy down the shop realise that actually when he's playing a greedy mana base with 4 different types of shockland to play off-colour cards, when he gets Blood Moon, it's gonna hurt. On the flip side then, they learn to sequence their Fetchlands to get basics, so they can play around Blood Moon, and Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. You have these decision tree moments in Magic that make the game so damn good. Then you have the interaction of Fetchlands with other cards. Brainstorm allows you to put cards back into your library and shuffle them away. It's the cornerstone, the bedrock of what Legacy is built upon. The selection that Brainstorm plus Fetchlands gives you. You have top deck manipulation, Sensei's Divine Top, Oracle of Moldiah, Future Sight, Mystic Forge. All these cards again benefit from having shuffle effects on hand, and Fetchlands are the easiest way of building those into your deck on a cheap, zero cost to deck building. Landfall triggers, Lotus Cobra, the old Steplinks cards that I mentioned, Tireless Tracker, all these cards that are wonderfully fun and exciting and interesting to play with, and they're made only better by the inclusion of Fetchlands. Tarmogoyf, Delirium, what else did I write down? Delve as a mechanic, the New York's Will in Theros, what the fuck's it called? Underworld Breach, much better with Fetchlands. Perhaps Magic's most broken 2 things that you've got currently inbuilt into the system. 1 is the mana system, because you can get screwed by variants, and 2 is the graveyard, because recurring things is brutal. It's another way of drawing cards, but often a much cheaper and more efficient way that screws your opponent. But those 2 elements might be fixed out of the game if it was redesigned today, but they're here. The box, I said it before, Pandora's box is open. They exist, and Fetchlands are a part and parcel of both of those things, right? The mana system and the graveyard system, so fuck it. Let's play with it. Let's play with good, powerful Magic cards that create interesting Magic. I could go on and on and on about talking about the synergies that Fetchlands have and the strategic opportunities they afford you when combined with other cards, but that'd be just a whole fucking list of things, and I think you get the point. I think if you've had the opportunity to play with Fetchlands in your decks, you understand that, wow, these cards enable my other cards, and they have cool synergies and effects, and yeah, they're pretty solid, but I just wish I could afford more, says little Timmy down the shop. So here's my closing point. We've had the bad, the good, and now I've got the ugly. Let's say the criticisms of Standard are valid. let's say, like I said, devil's advocate, shuffling is bad, mana fixing is bad. I point out that perhaps the criticisms of what they can't be installed might be legit. I don't agree myself, but they could be 100% legit. And I've also pointed out how they didn't make it into so many supplemental sets for reasons we're not quite sure. What it illustrates to me is that Fetchlands are the best example of how Wizards of the Coast as a collective, as a company, doesn't give a shit about non-rotating eternal formats. Think of it this way, Legacy itself isn't that expensive when you remove the need for dual lands. Miracles can play just basics. Many decks can play just basics. I've thought about doing some series on this channel of getting into Legacy on a budget. But the Fetchlands still a huge barrier to entry. They're a barrier for Legacy and they're a barrier for Modern. And they divide the EDH community as well. Like, why should you sit down at a shop and look at your opponent crack a Fetchland and wonder why they get that small, and albeit a very small incremental advantage with their deck because they just paid a bit more money into it, or at least have the capital to buy something so expensive. And bearing in mind, I'm not saying print these things to the point that they're 5p each, although that's fine by me as well. I'm saying print them to they're like $5 each, right? In a way, we should learn from the reserve list. If the reserve list is slowly throttling and eventually killing things like Legacy, why have a new version of that, which is just covered in cards that Wizards of the Coast don't want to reprint because they don't see a future in being able to monetize something like Modern. Modern has been a problem for Wizards for a long, long time. They have to manage it with like constant bans and cards break it all the time, but that's kind of the charm. It's just a complete shit show, and that's part of the charm. There's no unbreakable legal promise saying they can't reprint Fetchlands. They could put Fetchlands into every single supplemental set now until the end of time if they wanted to. The fact they haven't is one of two things. There's either conscious, malignant desire to damage and kill older formats, or two, it's incompetency. And they're the only two ways to look at it. They're either mismanaging it on purpose, or they're mismanaging it because they don't know how to manage it. And I'll give you a heads up. I'll give you this for free, Wizards. You have to pay me for this. The way to manage Fetchlands and other similar cards that cost too much is just simply to fucking reprint them. I don't know how I can make it any clearer. Like, that's it. That's the tweet. Send tweet, right? And for the record, I don't think they should be legal in Pioneer. So I just want to add on at the end that I hadn't written in my notes. I like the fact that Pioneer has a completely different identity to Modern and Legacy. I think that's great. And if Modern takes over and becomes the Legacy of the future and Pioneer is then the Modern, the bit I'm not looking forward to is when we're forced to evacuate Pioneer to the next format as that sinks into the ocean, because Wizards wouldn't print the real estate for Pioneer. If there's a load of lands or staples that they just don't reprint for no foreseeable bloody reason of them pushing us to buy power spiked, power pushed, power crept cards from new sets instead. I think we should be looking after our Eternal players. I think we should be making things cheaper and more affordable for Commander players as well. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Let me know what you think. Do you think I'm being hyperbolic? Do you think I'm being too harsh? Do you think there's another reason for why they don't get reprinted? Do you even care? Do you think it's purposeful, or do you think it's just not doing the correct job to manage the Fetchlands? Drop a like on the video, share with any friends that you think might enjoy this or find it enlightening. Leave a comment, let me know what you think, just in general, the whole conversation and the video. And make sure you subscribe, ring that fucking bell icon too, right? That's what YouTube wants you to do. I've been Vince, I'll see you all soon, and here's to hoping. Here's to fucking hoping that the Commander Legacy or the Commander Legendary Legends or whatever it is, the booster thing coming this year for Commander, here's to hoping that has some form of Fetchlands in it. Ta-ta for now.